Now, back to Sunrise on News Radio 880 KCMX.
Good morning, everybody. About 15 minutes after the hour, and want to welcome on to the program the president of the American Forest Resource Council, Tom Partin. And Tom, it's great to have you on. Get to the website, amforest.org. And I tell you what, Tom, a lot of hard work going on out there with what you're doing and bridging the gap with the county commissioners and getting the counties moving all in one way. And with the ONC lands and the revenue that's been lost, we're making some progress, though, aren't we?
Well, I think we are. And Craig, thanks for having me on your program again. It's always a pleasure to be here. A lot is happening, as you said. Unfortunately, a lot didn't happen at the close of the 113th Congress. As most of your listeners know, no ONC package was passed. We had two versions of that, one in House Bill 1526 that DeFazio, Schrader, and Walden put forward, and then, of course, we had the Wyden ONC plan. They were just too far apart. We couldn't come to any mid-ground on those bills, and they just languished, and nothing passed. Same on the U.S. Forest Service side of things. 1526 had a title for managing our Forest Service lands, trying to about double the amount of management on those acres, and then we had a Senator John Barrasso bill, Senate Bill 1966, I believe it was, that would call for about doubling production on Forest Service lands as well. But the interesting thing is we've got a lot of interest, we've got a lot of momentum from members of Congress that want to see those go forward, or some form of them go forward in the 114th Congress. Now, back to the subject that you mentioned, we did not get a passage of the Secure Rural Schools Act or the PILT, Payment in Lieu of Taxes. No coverage there, so our counties, unfortunately, are suffering until we can get some solution there, which will hopefully come in the first quarter of the year. But, of course, what the counties and AFRC and our industry members have wanted to do all along is boost production off of our federal forest lands, which, in fact, would enhance payments back to the counties and help both of us with that action. So we're in lockstep with the counties on trying to promote forestry legislation that would both increase harvest and increase payments back to counties. So that's what we're starting to work on heavily here as we enter the first few weeks of the 114th Congress.
It's interesting, Tom, that Congressman Greg Walden pledged support, and John Boehner did as well. But he said pledged to make a federal forest policy reform bill a priority, and they'll consider extension of the Secure Rural Schools program in the first quarter of 2015. But, it's just kind of like, why subsidize when you can it's a renewable resource. Let's manage the lands. Let's go through. Let's pick and choose. We've got the ability, and offer some type of economy that investors can come back in, right? And mill our timber that we grow so well in Southern Oregon.
Absolutely. For us and for most people looking at this issue, it looks like a clear path forward. Let's just boost our management on our federal lands. That is what carried our counties, our schools, our sheriff offices since the 1940s, when we started boosting our harvest off federal lands. As you know, the ONC lands, the 1937 ONC Act,
right.
I think from the 40s through the 90s, we were harvesting 1 billion board feet of timber off of those lands per year. Great returns back to the counties. There was certainty for our forest products industry, and the system worked. And then we had the listing of the spotted owl, the Northwest Forest Plan, and our harvest went from 1 billion board feet down to about 200 million. We had all of the loss of the industry infrastructure, and of course the dollars back to the counties were gone. So we decided to subsidize in the form of the Secure Rural Schools payments, which, don't get me wrong, the counties and the schools needed that money, but we've got to get back to a system that really pays for itself and something that manages the land instead of having our forests burn up.
Yeah, I mean,
that's a pretty straightforward analogy, I think, of what needs to happen.
Well, yeah, why would you just go from one subsidy, since that stopped because the Endangered Species Act, and then, we'll get in there and offer the Secure Rural Schools program so we can offer them another subsidy, when really the point is let the state manage the land. Interesting, Tom, and the reason I bring you on, a lot of letters coming out from the environmentalists relating carbon footprint, but they throw those words in, and I want to see if you can address it. Old growth, cutting old growth, and cutting fire-resistant trees, and clear cutting. What would you say to that?
As far as the carbon footprint?
Well, no, the buzzwords that the environmentalists throw out in their letters to the editor. I had multiple letters to the editor in the last couple of days locally here, and they're saying, hey, clear cutting is bad, it's erosion, and you've got old growth, cutting old, that we're not doing that, right? We're not cutting.
Well, their definition of old growth becomes interesting, and if you look at Senator Wyden's O&C bill, he defined old growth as 80 years, and obviously most of us know that old growth isn't 80 years, so the enviros can use that term old growth very loosely, throw terms out there. Basically what we're looking at doing in the management of most of the forest down in the Medford area are doing selective harvest, going in and taking out the weakened trees that are the ones that are going to cause the fires, that are going to be the burning, cause the huge fires that we've seen over the past few years. Obviously trying to leave some of the more resistant ponderosa pine and maybe Douglas fir in some areas. Some areas we are going to do regeneration. We've got very unhealthy stands. The only way to get those cleaned out is to go in and do a clear cut, remove the timbers in a particular block, but we will replant them, and let's get this straight. We replant at least 2 to 3 times as many trees as we harvest, and establish a healthy stand. And as you drive along the I-5 corridor from Roseburg down to Medford, you can see where these stands have been harvested and clear-cut, but replanted, and you've got these nice, healthy stands that sequester twice as much carbon as old-growth stands. So we think we're doing a good deed for the forest. We're getting unhealthy stands out, replanting them with a healthier stock of Douglas fir or other species, and we're sequestering more carbon. So that's the argument we use, and I think that's the proper argument.
Well, it would be, and I'll tell you, there's 2 things, and we've got a break coming up, but interesting, this comes from Nick Smith, Executive Director over at healthyforest.org. He said, from 1968 to 1985, fires burned an average of 3,700 acres per year across Oregon per fire. But after 85 through 2011, the average fire size increased to 46,000 acres per year per fire. That's amazing.
That's a staggering statistic, but again, it goes back to the fact that we're not managing our federal forests. They're becoming overcrowded, and once a fire gets started, you can't put the darn thing out. It's got too much momentum behind it, too much fuel, and for those listeners of yours, Nick at Healthy Forest, as you mentioned, healthyforest.org, does a great job of following these issues, trying to reconnect forest management back with the counties and back with the grassroots communities and how important this is. And I think he just does a great job.
Well, it's interesting that you can't just flip a switch. I was talking to other experts, and they said, yeah, the industry, you have to have the investors, but you've got to have the timber so that they can feel that, hey, if we invest, it's pretty much ironclad that we can get this, and they're not going to invest. And if they're not going to invest, then the infrastructure is simply not going to be built back up.
Well, you have to have tools to do the thinning out in the woods. I mean, you just can't go out and cut the trees down and let them lay. You've got a value, and at some point, you've got to have an industry that can process that. The only way an industry is going to be built is if there's some certainty, and of course, look at Rough and Ready, the ups and downs they've had there, and it's all been based on a certainty of natural resources and availability to their mill, and they've seemed to have found a niche, and we're certainly proud of them for restarting. But to get somebody new to come in and build a new plant, unless you have a 10-year certainty and a program that's going to be long-lived, it's going to be very hard to get new investors to come in, as you mentioned.
Exactly right. When we come back, we've got Tom Partin from American Forest Resource Council, their website, amforest.org. And I'll tell you, when we come back, I want to talk about this bark beetle that hit Colorado and the absolute opposite side, the flip coin of what could happen to Oregon's forests if we don't do that. Tom, hold on, and we'll be right back. We've got to get to a break. The Sunrise Show on News Radio 880 KCMX. We'll be back after this.
So
to Sunrise on News Radio 880 KCMX.
Good morning, everybody. 35 minutes after the hour. Welcome to the Sunrise Show. Continuing with Tom Partin he's the president of the American Forest Resource Council, and his website, amforest.org, and they're doing a great work up there. And Tom, it's always great to have you on because you're following the legislation, and I've been following this 1526, this House Resolution 1526 that Congressmen Greg Walden, Peter DeFazio, and Kurt Schrader put together, and I just am shocked that this coming September 2015, that resolution 1526 was introduced and passed. It'll be 3 years since September 2012 that it was passed the first time, and then they brought it back through and passed it again in September 2014 to try to get it through the Senate. Of course, they wouldn't, and you got to go back up the truck again. Walden, Schrader, DeFazio worked on this legislation for 2 years plus before they sent it through for committee. It's unbelievable. We've got Oregonians starving, economies falling through the cracks, and the politicians sit on the federal level. They sit on this thing. It just is unbelievable to me.
Well, I think the interesting part of that bill and why it was passed through the full House, the full House voted on this twice, once in 2013 and once in 2014, is that it was bipartisan. And each one of the congressmen took heat for different reasons in the bill. Of course, it had a lot of wilderness. It had a lot of scenic rivers that Greg Walden took pressure from his constituents for.
Right.
It boosted the harvest up to 500+ million, which Peter DeFazio and Kurt Schrader took heat from their constituents that some folks thought it was too much harvest. But at the end of the day, it was a balanced bill, and all three of these gentlemen stood tall and supported it through the House, which is no easy task.
Right.
To get a bill through the House and passed in this past Congress, there were very few bills passed. So that was what we're optimistic about, is taking that momentum and the fact that it was passed twice in the House and trying to move it forward in this 114th Congress. Unfortunately, Peter DeFazio is no longer ranking member on the House Natural Resources Committee, but he still sits on that committee. He did a lot of great work, he and his staffer Travis Joseph, but I'm sure he'll still be a part of this, and we're looking forward to Greg Walden and Kurt Schrader to really help us drive this home in this coming Congress session. You
know what, Tom? I wonder, because I jump up and down on this House Resolution 1526, but I always go back to the land, the ONC Land Act 1937. Why can't we just stick to that?
Well, that's a good point, and in fact, our group, AFRC, and some of our members have filed a lawsuit in the D.C. court saying those lands should be managed under the ONC Act. But we've got, back in the 90s, we got other things in front of it, being the spotted owl listing and the Northwest Forest Plan. We do not believe the ONC lands should be managed under the Northwest Forest Plan, but at this point they are. There's a lot of management strategies under the Northwest Forest Plan that really reduce the opportunity for harvest, especially spotted owl critical habitat. The fact that we've got the red tree voles out there, we have to do survey and manage, and when you compound all of these issues that came with the Northwest Forest Plan, that's why we've gone from 1 billion board feet harvest down to 200 million. So there's got to be some strategy to get out from under all of this, these layers of rules to where we can manage our land and keep these acres from burning up, which to most of us makes a lot of sense.
Exactly. Tom, we've got a call coming in. Let's see if we can't grab that real quick. Good morning. You're live on the Sunrise Show.
Morning, Craig. Good morning to your guest.
Yes, sir. You have a question. Go ahead.
I have two questions. Number one, one I've reiterated before, do we have the capability, if the lands were turned over to the state and counties, do we have the resources and the personnel to manage those forests? Is there any chance that we could bring your guest or someone similar in their intent along with Andy Kern on a public debate over your radio program on the pros and cons of our timber harvest?
Ooh, good point. Yeah, all right. Thanks, Dwayne. I appreciate it.
Andy wrote that letter to the Tribune a couple days ago, which I read in depth, and it was very interesting.
Yeah, it's a matter of managing the lands. We're not having the ability to do it. Correct?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Tom, what would you comment on that?
Well, Andy's an interesting gentleman.
I'm going to sign off so I can hear the...
All right. Thanks, Dwayne.
Andy has supported managing the forest, particularly on the east side with on the Malheur National Forest, where they've got the 10-year stewardship, and also on the Fremont National Forest, where Collins Pine has their 10-year stewardship. There is not the agreement on the west side, where, as you mentioned earlier, a lot of the environmental community think that all we're doing is clear cutting and cutting old growth, which isn't the fact. And we on the west side is where we stand some of the higher risk, especially in southwest Oregon, of having our forest burn up, and we do need to do some work down there. But I don't think you're going to get Andy Kerr and some of the other groups to buy into that, to agree that those harvests need to go forward, and I think that's probably where the debate lies.
Exactly. Well, Tom, what's interesting is there's such a glut of timber, and why I always bring up, consider the alternative, ladies and gentlemen, and that is when I drove to Colorado and I saw hill after hill after hill of brown trees, and I didn't know what I was looking at first. Come to find out, it was the bark beetle from and it had taken over, and they didn't know what to do. They couldn't get rid of it. It's just there, and that could easily happen to us with all of our weak trees that we've got that are fighting for sunlight, fighting for water. That's what the foresters tell me, is that it makes weak trees.
Well, in fact, Craig, we have the same thing happening in Colorado. There's two species of trees. There's lodgepole pine, which the mountain pine beetle have gotten into, and there's the spruce. And we have a lot of lodgepole pine up around the Crater Lake, Diamond Lake area. And the Forest Service, the Umpqua National Forest, and Rogue River Siskiyou have put projects up to treat the lodgepole pine up in those areas, because we've got some severe outbreaks of the mountain pine beetle, just like Colorado, but the environmental community have sued to try to stop those sales. And so we need to keep our eye on that, because we could have some huge devastation, just like Colorado's seen up in the Crater Lake area, Diamond Lake area, where these lodgepole species grow.
This is, be careful what you wish for. It's kind of like, we got to take control, or it'll take control of us. Anyway, well, Tom, we're out of time, but it's always great to hear the latest news. Of course, we'll be watching as the Congress and the Senate, if they work together, the House Representatives and the Senate work together and get something onto the president's desk, so we can work through this.
Just in closing, I think we have some good committees assignments this year, with Murkowski heading up Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee, and I mentioned earlier that Maria Cantwell from Washington State will be the ranking member on that. And on the House side, we have Rob Bishop from Utah, who's been a strong supporter of managing our federal lands. In Utah, of course, we have so much grazing and mineral and oil, in addition to timber, and I think Rob will be a good chairman of that committee. Hate to lose Doc Hastings, but I think Rob will step in there and fill those shoes adequately. Yeah,
it's no kidding. I'm going to make a pun. This is going to be topic discussion this next time. Is the Forest Service just backed off of their marketing efforts? They made an announcement. They're going to not spend the $10 million that they had slated for marketing for pushing the Forest Service. I don't know if you had seen that or not.
Yeah, that they call it branding. They're trying to figure out how to brand their agency, and going to spend $10 million to come up with a branding campaign to bring their agency closer together. If you talk to a lot of the Forest Service retirees, there was a lot of angst and what that would do.
Interesting. All right, Tom, thank you so much. We'll be talking real soon.
Thank you, Craig, and always a pleasure to be on your show.
You bet. Ladies and gentlemen, Tom Partin, the president, American Forest Resource Council. Get to their website, amforest.org, and we'll look forward to our next conversation. Thank you, Tom.
You bet.
All right. We'll be right back. More on the Sunrise Show as we continue. Ran long on that. Boy, oh boy, oh boy. Unbelievable stuff. All right. Get to a break, come back. Yeah, we'll be talking about the branding of the Forest Service. Where'd they find $10 million and somehow they just decided, oops, maybe we shouldn't do that. That might be bad. Along with this hemp issue. We'll be talking about that as well. More on the Sunrise Show. We'll get to a break right here on News Radio 880 KCMX.